Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome to another edition of Tech Interviews. On this week's show, we're going to dig into one of our favourite topics, which is the exploration of a good old IT acronym. So, on target for us this week is going to be the phrase AIOps. What it is, how do we avoid the hype when it comes to talking about things like machine learning and artificial intelligence? And what inspired this show actually was when I was contacted by a colleague of this week's guest, and he shared with me some ideas and some of the conversations that they have, and particularly around this idea of demystifying what we mean when we talk about AI ops, and particularly this idea of avoiding the machine learning hype. So, why don't we jump into that topic by introducing this week's guest? And joining me this week is Casey Kindiger. Casey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me this week.
Thanks for being on the show. Appreciate your time. Before we jump in, as we always do, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about who you are and what it is you do.
Yeah, so my name's Casey Kindiger. I'm the CEO of Grockstream. I am a serial entrepreneur. Before founding Grockstream, I started an IT process automation company called Resolve Systems. I co-founded it and ended up selling it to Insight Venture Partners. And before that, I started an IT services company, kind of in this same IT operations space. So I've been in this space for a while. In the last 10 years, I've become increasingly interested in the idea that machine learning can really make a big impact in the domain that I've been working in. So that's really what I do at Grock. I mean, I am very much focused on the data science, the machine learning, the science behind what we do these days. I have a great team partner and that focus on kind of the business side of things. I'm very focused on the technology, in particular the machine learning and the data science.
Well, I think you've maybe more than any other guest, you've kind of ticked many of the IT futurist topics there, haven't we? We've talked about machine learning, we've talked about AI, we've talked about data science, and I think all of those topics are interesting. And I suppose what caught my attention when your colleague contacted me about maybe doing a show together was an idea of trying to avoid the hype, trying to avoid some of the mistakes that I think many of us, when we hear about something new and exciting, many of the mistakes that we often rush into, and I particularly like in this kind of area of the industry, the idea that all of this is so very simple and we can just turn it on and magic will happen. I always find that a fascinating concept because I think we'll maybe look at some of this in that. It's a little bit more complex than that. There's a little bit more to it. But maybe before we start that, I use a phrase in my introduction around this idea of AI ops. So maybe for those who are not familiar with that phrase or maybe not come across it before, do you want to set a little bit of context of what it is we mean when we talk about AI ops?
That sounds great. Yeah, and I'll do it in two ways. First, I'll give you the sort of the simple definition, and then I want to tell a story and kind of compare, because this is really a big change for folks that have been in this industry for a long time. So, I mean, the sort of the short answer is that AI ops is really the process of applying machine learning or data science to improving IT operations, using all the tools available to improve the IT operations processes. It's a broad category, and it doesn't sound that exciting, but I'll kind of give you some background and a story that gives you a sense of how fundamental this is. So first, I'll kind of state something that's obvious to everyone that's really in this space, and that is that the machine learning is really driving a shift in how IT operations happens. I mean, it's pushing us to rethink how kind of the boundaries of the work that we do every day are shifting. And where I think it's kind of interesting to kind of compare it to is if you look at the change in how humans how scientists understood the way that human learning happens, how that shifted starting about 50 years ago. Okay, there was this cognitive revolution that changed from sort of a behaviorist understanding of human learning and reacting to a more complex understanding, really. And from the behavior side, everyone's pretty familiar with guys like Pavlov's dog experiments. Okay, that kind of thinking, span back hundreds of years, and but the problem with it is it didn't really explain a very wide variety of behaviors that we actually see in the world. So it was really simplistic. Um, in a similar way, before AIOps started pushing the boundaries that I'm talking about, the IT operation world built intelligence into our systems by encoding these specific sort of stimulus response behaviors in the systems that we built. So it's really similar. Like for example, we would build fixed thresholds around telemetry data to tell us if CPU utilization spiked or memory utilization spiked, right? We would encode fixed responses that trigger certain behavior depending on how these thresholds get hit. We would encode a lot of fixed rules around kind of processing, because that ended up pushing a lot of data to analysts to understand what's happening. And so we'd build a whole bunch of these correlation rules, like if then, conditional analysis of all the data coming in to try and skinny it down so we can make a decision on what to do. So rules upon rules, tons of rules that encoded behavior at each layer of the kind of the environment, and it just didn't work. I mean, it has the limitations are pretty obvious, right? Um, Things change so quickly in IT. The services that are on top change, and the infrastructure below change. So it just doesn't work very well. What AIOps is all about is really changing this rules-based management thinking to a paradigm that's based on cognitive processes that really learn and adapt at their core. And that's really what AIOps is all about.
Yeah, and I think in there you make some really interesting points, and and I think it's very true of quite a lot in IT at the moment. I think when we talk about some of kind of these new trends in a specific area, so in the area of kind of improving operations in this case, I think when we look more broadly across the technology infrastructure, we start to see very similar things. I love the Pavlovian response idea, the idea that something's gone wrong, so it must be DNS. We always, that's almost the IT Pavlovian response. And the business response is something's not working, it must be IT's fault, and how do we and I suppose the challenge with that kind of fixed thinking, if we were to look at the world of antivirus, anti-malware software, we've seen that has moved away from this idea of signature-based, trying to react to things that we already know, because a lot of the challenges we're facing in that space are things that we don't already know. We're looking for user behavior, we're looking for odd behaviors that don't match the norm, and we've had to evolve into that because actually the speed of threat, I suppose, in that space is such that we can't rely on somebody's found something, we update a bunch of signatures and database information quickly enough that we'll catch it next time. Is that kind of the same driver that you're seeing in terms of operations as well?
That's exactly right. I mean, the reality is it never actually worked. The rules-based approach in a microcosm felt like we were accomplishing something, right? Something would break, or we would get an intrusion, and we would address that after the fact by building a set of conditional responses, and it just doesn't work. And it's exactly what the challenge with it just gets magnified the more complex the underlying systems get, and the more complex the services that ride on top are. And so now it's sort of obvious to everyone that the rules driven approach doesn't solve the problem, that really what we've done is thrown bodies at it in the past. That's fundamentally what we've done. And the only way to approach kind of automation systematically is by using machine learning models, flexible thinking encapsulated in machine learning models.
And do you think, because I think one of the other challenges we see again across the technology stack in general, and I do a lot of work in the data space, so we see a lot of this is driven by the constant changing demand on data, the amounts of data that we're generating. Again, is that something that you're seeing in terms of why operations needs to evolve? Because actually, you talked there before about kind of the speed of change, but also the scale of change. Is it because as business becomes more demanding of its technology stack, that we need to react more quickly, and as the environment becomes more complex, it's no longer that environment in a data center, it's hugely distributed workforces, it's locations using public cloud, it's using partner organizations. Is it kind of that growth in demand for speed of change, speed, the size and scale of the problem? Is that having to drive an evolution in a way that we look at operations?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, and part of it is the growing complexity. Humans are great at thinking linearly, right? We don't parallel process. And as the complexity of the inbound flow of information grows, the requirements for, if we're doing, if we're using a broken rules based approach, we're really relying on people to think through the phenomena each time they occur, and it just requires exponentially more people to do it. So the way I look at it, the primary driver really is the complexity of the underlying data. The good news on the operations side is that we have tons of data. There is no shortage of high quality operational data flowing from our services today. We do a great job of instrumenting and processing that data. What we don't do is a lot of useful things with it. That, to me, that's really, there's a hugely valuable treasure that is nascent in every enterprise, and we view that as just a tremendous opportunity that we've been focused on, and that's really the essence of what we do.
So I think you make a really good point there, actually, about the amount. It's not a shortage of data that we can turn into useful information. It's having the ability to take all of that data and turn it into interesting information. And I suppose that leads on to kind of the thing that really caught my attention about having this conversation with you, and that's the idea of how do we avoid this kind of hype around this kind of thing? Because the thing that really struck me with that last sentence was, I think what we tend to find is lots of people go, great, I've got loads of data. So what I can do is just push some machine learning at it and it will magically tell me things. I mean, one, is that true? And if it isn't, how do we avoid thinking it is and doing something about it?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's not true. Like the problem is that is really so much opportunity that we have to carefully think through what specific business value we're going to target, and how we're going to measure that, and communicate it incrementally as we sort of exploit this big opportunity that we have. So I would say don't afraid to be boring. Like really, this is an exciting topic, but don't be afraid to be boring right up front, and start with what your typical KPIs are. Don't, for incident management, you can look at simple things like the number of incidents per week or the number of incidents per day. Just think about incident flow and driving that number down. For problem management, you can think about things like time to identify the root cause. Okay, for change management, similarly, we can grab some very simple metrics. There's a large basket of opportunity that exists in standard KPIs built around IT processes. We don't have to be super creative there. But what I would say, like um, a really good uh, tip would be, look at what your business is currently talking about. Like, what are the key priorities, and just prioritize the ones. Try to align what you're trying to accomplish with what the sort of key priorities of the overall organization are, because consensus building and getting buy-in for both the metric and the how you're measuring the value over time is really important. You've got people need to believe that on one hand, um, you're actually accomplishing what you say you're going to accomplish, but they also have to believe that that's important. So getting that buy-in early is super important. So these are just some ways of ensuring that, number one, you don't overshoot, and number two, you're getting incremental buy-in as you sort of roll out your program, because it is not a one shot. It's not a moonshot. This is a program that is transformational. It changes every single IT process, every single sort of ITIL process, if you will. It will fundamentally shift all of those, but it's not going to do it overnight. It requires careful thought, careful planning, and it really requires that you engage the organization in that process.
So the first part of your answer there would have been a huge disappointment to everybody because I'm sure people were hoping that what you was going to say was Casey was going to say there's just a magic button and we just press it and everything is fine. So there's real disappointment there. So there'll be a whole bunch of people sticking pins in dolls of you, I would think, from now on.
Yeah.
But I think what's again what intrigues me with that answer is the parallels you're seeing elsewhere because I'm a huge advocate of some of this kind of stuff around the idea of buy-in, buy-in across an organization, and it's not just buy-in at the very top from the decision makers, because while that's important, because we might need to spend money on doing some of this, so somebody's got to buy into that. It needs to be buying across the entire organization, and often what often this thing I see that drives that is because we're making cultural shift as well. This is not just a technology shift. This is a cultural shift in the way we operate. Is that similar in terms of the way you're looking at AIOps, in that actually if an organization is going to embrace this kind of stuff and feel the benefit of it, there needs to be cultural change as well. This is not just about technology adoption.
Yeah, I mean it definitely is because the if you think about it, the human to machine interaction portion of what we've been talking about here is really huge. It is taking a big part of the workload that people do today, which is just information processing. It's one step beyond the Pavlovian response. And that's not exciting work, but humans can do it. They just can't do it real well in parallel. But there's a lot more work that is way more interesting and challenging and exciting for people to do. But any kind of transformation like this, initially is felt like a threat on current kind of workloads. But the reality is, it's a huge opportunity to upshift the work that folks on in the IT teams do today. So I think it is engaging the teams into the process early on, getting them excited, building evangelists across the organization is huge. And it not only kind of speaks to the topic that we're discussing today, which is the business value. It helps us communicate and reinforce the business value as we go, but it also helps bolster the success of the overall program, as you stated. I mean, it's a huge part of the success of any kind of transformational initiative. We need to get that, and especially with machine learning and AI, because everyone has these giant killer robots in their head, and so there's some natural response, reactions to that idea when you start bringing it into the organization. So yeah, I think you make a really good point.
Yeah, nobody wants Skynet in their ops department, which is true. Um, so I think you've talked a couple of times about kind of the benefit, the organisational benefit, the benefit of kind of embracing this kind of technology approach and this kind of operational approach. So if I'm listening to this and I'm an IT decision maker, I might be listening to this and thinking this all sounds great, but the reality of what I can hear is this might be hard and this might be expensive. So what are some of the so maybe deal with that question first, but also what are some of the benefits that you've seen where organizations embrace this kind of approach well? What has been some of the kind of the outcome, the benefit, and the change of the changes that you've seen?
I mean, if planned correctly, the outcome is um, significant and easily measured and observed. And for example, in just the sort of lower level portions of IT operations, where we're monitoring and instrumenting the infrastructure, right? And we're trying to process all that data to make sensible decisions from it. Um, you know, Whereas before, we would spend time building correlation rules and implementing correlation tools and implementing very difficult CMDB style projects to build rules from. With machine learning and with AI ops, we can encapsulate that body of work into flexible and adaptive algorithms. And within just we've seen within a month of deployment, reducing incident volumes by 80%. and that's across a global organization. Uh, and it's, which sounds like pie in the sky, but the reality is so much of the work that people are doing right now is at that lower level kind of, you know, one step beyond Pavlovian response, but not that far removed, that can very readily be done with a machine learning model. So the if you plan out the initiatives well, the impact is large, but has to be focused. Like, you have to know what you're trying to um, attack before you start rolling out machine learning technology. Before you start rolling out AIOps, know exactly what benefit targets you have in mind, and focus the efforts around those benefit targets.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That I mean, we're talking here about kind of leading edge technology when we start talking about machine learning and AI, and and these things aren't off the shelf. There's work to be done in embracing this because of like we talked about before, not just technological change, but cultural change as well. But it's also interesting, isn't it, in terms of planning to deploy IT, the focus should actually be what are the outcomes, and that should never have, that's something that we should have all been doing for a very long time. It's if we're going to deliver any IT project, what's the business benefit? What are the outcomes? What are the goals for this project? And I think alongside that, there should always be that element of and where are we right now? I think often sometimes people know where they want to get to, but often don't really know where they're starting from, which is a whole problem. Maybe a machine learning algorithm that tells us where we are at the start would be helpful as well. So so I think all of those things are kind of really interesting. And it's a great mix between new approaches and taking classical approaches in terms of how we go around achieving this. So if I'm listening to this show as somebody making IT decision making and like the idea of improving my operational efficiency, making sure that my IT staff's week is spent on things that are going to deliver better outcomes and better value to the business than running around dealing with operational issues that actually with a little bit of thought and investment we could take away and really improve the efficiency of how we deal with them. So if I'm listening to that and saying, well, that sounds like a good idea, have you got maybe 2 or 3 tips that you would give to somebody to say, if you're going to start down this route, what are the kind of things you should be focusing on? What are the kind of things to think about?
Yeah, yeah. I think what I'll give two sort of traps to avoid, which I think will be even more useful, and then one grand slam opportunity tip, like that everyone should really take advantage of when they start planning for this type of program. So first, I think the most important trap to avoid is any rules-driven benefit hypothesis. So there are lots of folks that are attacking this space with sort of sprinkling a little bit of machine learning on top of legacy rules kind of based paradigms, and that just doesn't scale. So you can get pilots to be successful, but you can't scale that as an overall kind of strategy for delivering ongoing and wide kind of success with AI ops. And that you're kind of about to fall into those traps if the model of deployment requires a CMDB or a topological map of the network, right? So you know even if the topology is based on a kind of a quote unquote auto discovered map of the network, those are just too rigid, and they're not adaptive enough to build um, uh, sort of um, adaptive machine learning models on top. So that's you're going to fall into the trap if you see if kind of if you're building on top of a topological approach. The second way that you're falling into the trap, if it heavily relies on, like, if your architecture, your design heavily relies on the kind of low level instrumentation of thresholds, um, uh, that sort of starting out of the gates the wrong way, and it makes it really difficult. You can build a pilot that's successful, but it's really hard to build on top of that. You need to be able to ingest raw operational data without rules at the base level. The third way you know you're about to fall into that trap, and I've talked about this a little bit earlier, is if you're building, if you're using some machine learning, but the outcome of it is a set of correlation rules or a set of conditional logic. So you can do that. You can run some statistical analysis and you can extract some information that lets you build fixed rules. But at the end of the day, they're fixed rules, and that's not using the ML the way that maximally benefits you. So those are kind of three ways that you're about to fall into a trap that you should avoid kind of up front. The second trap is avoiding. This is a little bit technical, but if you've started down this path, you'll know what I'm talking about. Avoid manual labeling requirements for classification. So classification is one of the tool sets that you'll use in AIOps, and you want to make sure that you haven't again designed a pilot that looks really really good, but doesn't have you haven't thought about how you're going to incorporate new information into the models, and that's an absolute necessity that you don't require data munging and analytics at each learning step. If you do, then growing it and expanding it and frankly managing it is going to be really tough. Okay, so those are two things not to do. Um, um, the tip that I'll give for everyone starting out to really try to drive all of your outcomes to uh, directly increasing automation. And best case scenario, that means you actually have a run book at the end of your workflow, your AIOps workflow, that gets kicked off, and the response or the result of that run book, which is an automated set of actions that happen, actually feeds back into the learning process. You don't have to get that sophisticated right up front, but that should be really our goal. Our goal is to bring the cognitive process all the way to the action steps, and let those actions feed back into the workflow. So again, that's kind of where the vision is, but the closer you can get to that, the better. It, it's easier to measure the outcome. It's easier to drive additional ROI and so forth.
So it sounds like if you see anything that is going to do rules or require manual classification, run very quickly the other way. That sounds about right.
Yeah, yeah. The you can build a pilot that looks really great, but if it's built on those things, it's not going to work in production.
So, well, look, it's case as we kind of get to the end of our time here. I wanted to touch a little bit about on how you guys are helping to address some of this stuff. Then, because obviously, people listening to this show or watching the show here, aren't silly. They realise this is your area of expertise, so this must be something that your company are helping to deliver. So how are Grockstream helping people to avoid some of those pitfalls, take advantage of some of the opportunities? What is it that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. One of the areas that we're really, I think, doing some interesting work right now, expanding our portfolio, is we're thinking a lot about how the citizen data science within all of these IT organizations can understand the inner workings of the machine learning and really make an impact on how the models develop and grow without being a data scientist. We think so. Our hypothesis was that the better we're able to do that, the number one, faster the kind of paradigm shifts. Number two, the better the models actually work, because we can then exploit what humans do really really well, what machines do really really well, connect those two, and the overall IT process works way better. It's more automated, more streamlined, and more adaptive. So that's what we're thinking about a lot these days, is bringing the regular knowledge worker, the IT knowledge worker, closer and closer to the algorithms. Not just giving them something to visualize. Hey, not the sort of the what of AI ops, but the why and the how of AI ops. The closer we bring them in, the better we're all going to be. So that's kind of really exciting work that we're doing today.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because actually one of my colleagues talks a lot about this idea of maybe more than ever in terms of technology, we're finding ways to put the tools in the hands of the people who need them, not be abstracted away from that by having to come to a data scientist in this area, or, having to go to a networking expert or a storage expert. While I'm not saying for a moment, and I hope people don't get me wrong, I'm not saying for a moment there isn't a place for these people, because absolutely there is. but actually from a business operations and outcomes point of view, if we can put the tools in the hands of the people who know how to drive the business decisions, we're going to have a much, a much more effective solution for any organization. Is that kind of behind your thinking?
Definitely. And I think, um, yeah, it definitely is. The less we make this and it's not a matter of gradation. We cannot require data scientists and machine learning experts to drive incremental benefit on the AIOps side. It has to be done from the knowledge worker, and that's not easy. That's a hard thing to do. I think we're really good at it at Grock, with Grock. But it requires thoughtful human to machine design principles, and really putting ourselves in the shoes of the folks on the ground doing the work every day.
Well, Casey, we're kind of getting to the end of our time here, and it's been a fascinating topic, and I'm sure people probably listening to this have got a million questions, and because I think we have absolutely only scratched the very surface of what is clearly a complex and deep topic. We said right at the beginning, there's no kind of magic button that you just turn AI ops on and everything just magically gets solved. There's a lot of work, planning, thought, understanding of where you're trying to get to. There's all of those kind of things there. So if people are listening to this and want to find out more about either what Grockstream do or find out more from yourself, is there a good way they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is just to go to our website at www.grockstream.com. We've got really a great couple of educational series that are going on. One that's Grock University, where it's really focused on the machine learning and data science side of AIOps. Not really about our product at all, but very much about the education, driving awareness and engaging folks, these knowledge workers in this revolution that's happening. So that's a really good place to start. You can also find me on Twitter at Kindiger, and on LinkedIn at Casey Kindiger. So both of those, I like to share content occasionally as well. But our website has some great resources, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and well, that Grock University sounds like a great follow-up for anybody who's kind of been engaged by the conversation we've had, because it sounds like that's the place to start digging maybe a little bit more into the details. So that sounds great. I'm going to go check that out as soon as we're done here. But Casey, look, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show, and yeah, thanks for being a great guest, and look forward to having you on again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that. For show notes, pop over to techstringy.com. We'll also find all of our previous Tech Interviews episodes. And if you've got an idea for a show or would like to appear as a guest, then why not email me at podcast@techstringy.com. To make sure you catch the next Tech Interviews, then why not subscribe? You can subscribe right here on YouTube or in all good homes of podcasts, which includes Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher and Spotify. So until next time, thanks for watching.